Hello, and welcome to the Mothers of All Crime. This is a podcast where we deep dive into mothers involved in infamous crimes and scandals. I'm Monica, and this is Crystal.
Continuing our Daughters of the Cult series, which is two parts, is part 2 of Daughters of the Cult, which we're going to be focusing on the 4 o'clock murders.
Yes. So for anyone who is coming in to this episode, definitely go back and listen to the first one. It's going to give you a lot more context. You probably could listen to them separately, but abbreviations and time frames, it's going to make more sense if you do part 1 first.
Agreed. Do you want me to just lay out the basic specs of what happened
give us a
that day?
recap.
Okay, so I'm going to set the scene a little bit because we're in Houston and Irving, Texas, because they're called the 4 o'clock murders, which kind of implies that it's a murder in one place that happens at 4 o'clock, but it's actually 4 murders occurring in 3 locations in different areas all around this 4 o'clock time, which is a significant time for the Mormon people, I guess, because I guess that was the time that Joseph Smith was executed when he was in prison, was 4 p.m. So that's like a significance and why 4 o'clock is significant for Mormons. But this was, let me just look at the date, June 27th, 1988. So that was 36 years ago. And it was all in Texas. 4 people died, and their names were Mark Chenoweth. I just listened to this, and I'm still saying
I know, and I'm never going to pronounce them right, so we're sorry.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. Mark and Dwayne Chenoweth, Jennifer Chenoweth, and Eddie Marston. So it's 3 adult men and 1 little 8-year-old child. Jennifer was with her father at the time of the shootings and was a casualty in the situation. And at first, it was hard to say who did this, how it was done. And in Texas and in most places, you need to know who committed what crime in order to prosecute it. So the police were having a very difficult time initially discussing what happened. We could talk about the family's reactions to the deaths, or we could talk about the ensuing police stuff with Cynthia.
So I think you were totally right that this was a very symbolic decision. So June 27th at 4 o'clock in 1844 was when Joseph Smith, who is the founder of the Mormon religion, was murdered in Illinois in his jail cell. So it was basically like an angry mob who came after him for a multitude of reasons. And it is very interesting that it was the same day and time, fast forward. So a lot of people tend to, it's more like of a memory thing, and to have such violence occur on this day really kind of showed how hard turn that this group has gone. And you're right, when it comes to prosecuting a crime, you have to know who committed what crime. And leading up to this, each murder appeared to be completely identical. All the individuals approached the victims in a blue suit. They had a beard, very conspicuous. They all drove up in stolen trucks. There was no fingerprints, no positive IDs by witnesses, nothing. So the police kind of just, again, like we talked about last time, very orchestrated, very calculated, and they're just sitting there not knowing really where to go next. But I don't blame them.
For sure. I mean, initially, no one even knew these were connected until the reports came in, and it just seemed impossible that the same person could have gone to each location and committed all the crimes because they were all at the same time in different places. So they knew that they were looking for multiple perpetrators, but they didn't have good witnesses because you're right, everyone's dressed the same in similar trucks that don't belong to them. So it is very difficult to prove the who, what, the who, what, when, and why. They only knew that the similarities between these people is that they're all former members of, I think at this time it's the Kingdom of God is what they're calling themselves. Yeah, so they're all
Well,
former followers of Ervil LeBaron.
they're all former followers of Ervil LeBaron, not necessarily Kingdom of God.
That's, you know what, that's a very good distinction. You're right.
Yes. Because Kingdom of God kind of became the offset, because when he died, they all kind of split into their three groups. And poor Jennifer, she just wanted to go with her dad for the day and like hang out. The poor thing was just kind of a casualty of, you can't leave a witness alive who saw the whole thing. She
Absolutely.
never was intended to be a victim, but you do what you got to do. They went with a purpose and a plan, and they had to follow the plan.
Yeah, they did. I mean, it makes sense if you're thinking from a completely logical, with no empathy kind of perspective, because she did see everything, it seems, and she could have identified probably the shooters, because these people are all in the same religious group. So they couldn't leave her, essentially.
Yeah. So we had talked about the Book of the New Covenant, the kind of crazy scribbles that were put together while Ervil was in prison. And in that was a hit list. It was, to my understanding, kind of woven in. It wasn't like a number one, murder so-and-so. It was kind of like inconspicuous in the book, but direct enough where people who had followed him for a while could understand blood atonement to certain individuals. And all of these people were people on that list. And because of that, and the rumors that someone is starting to go on this list caused a lot of fear within the community.
Absolutely. I mean, it's terrifying, because I think a lot of people were starting to feel that the group had less power without Ervil, because at this point he's dead. But if something this terrible could still happen clearly at his command, that meant everybody else mentioned in the books were potentially next. And I think it was Anna in the Daughters of the Cult that made a good point at some point, where she said, I didn't think I would be a target, but I knew that I could end up getting hurt or killed just in the process of another target, because all of these people all know each other and all interacting. And she was living with Mark and his family at the time of the shooting. So she knew that she was also in physical danger. And I think that almost everyone in this group feared for their lives.
Oh, absolutely. And they kind of started to turn on each other, where you don't know who is dangerous at this point. You don't know who's part of the secret community. You don't know who's capable of what, because all of them have basically been trained to be killers. So it doesn't matter if it's your mother, brother, sister. People started carrying guns just to protect themselves from their closest people. And Mark's family, which obviously he was a target, he was eliminated, but there was suspicions that his wife was also coming up next, and his whole family actually went into witness protection, which I'm kind of glad that they stepped up and offered that to them.
I know, it does seem like witness protection played a pretty big role in this story overall. I think that they were cult victims, and there was so much interstate and intercountry stuff going on with this group that I am not surprised that the cops, the FBI, all of these things are involved, because there's so many crimes happening in Mexico, in Texas, and Utah. It's all interconnected. So, I mean, they definitely needed the protection.
Yeah, and that's what's so hard is the girls in the documentary kept kind of pointing out the fact that the individuals that were down in Mexico, there wasn't a lot of communication with them. So you didn't necessarily know the people in Texas, Denver, Salt Lake. They weren't necessarily communicating with those down in this rural part of Mexico. So when you're isolated like that, and we see this across a lot of groups, they tend to get more and more extreme because they don't have that outside influence being like, maybe not the best plan. Like,
Absolutely.
and
I mean,
so it
they're
kind of doesn't
extremely
surprise
isolated.
me. Yeah. And when you don't know who's picking up this book and starting the eliminations, that's that other idea of like, you're constantly, everyone's a suspect because you don't know per se who is behind it all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Everyone's a suspect. Someone in within the group has turned. Multiple people have. And so you can't trust anyone. But it's definitely easy to be suspicious of the people the furthest away because you're not seeing them all of the time. And they're isolated from the group, but they're probably also isolated from the community that they're even living in Mexico, because they're white people. A lot of them are fugitives. They may not speak the language, and they're polygamists, and they're in an
Mm-hmm.
extreme religious cult. So they're not even having community interactions. And there's no social media. People don't have cell phones. So they have very limited communication with the people that they do know in the States.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you said polygamous because I feel like this group, I almost forget that they're polygamists. Like,
Mm,
they
I
have
know.
so much other stuff going on that the polygamy is so low on the totem pole where, yes, there's polygamy. Yes, there's underage brides. Yes, there's a lot of abuse. But I hate to say it, you kind of forget about it versus like it was so high up in some of these other groups where this one is you have murder, hits, like firebombing. Like you have all these crazier connections that it's weird to say that polygamy is like the least concerning thing they do.
Right. It really is super minimal in the whole thing. I feel like there's a few mentions in the series, obviously, about the polygamy of it all. And I've read several articles, and they are mentioning how toxic polygamy was growing up, how it was very difficult for women. I think it's Anna and Celia's mother that is still a believer.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it just gets swept away because there's so much murder and violence and other things happening.
Yeah.
Like, polygamy, who cares?
Right. I never thought I would say that, but here we are. But I think you had mentioned earlier the kind of response to these murders by the families. So we kind of talked about how Mark's family, what was left of them, went into witness protection. A lot of people started getting really concerned, but it it also kind of derailed Lillian, who was his wife, her whole life.
Yes.
They were in this group, but they were monogamists. They had their kids, and they truly were, after his LeVaron's death, trying to teach their kids to live without fear, be into the community. Like, they really were trying to, like, move into a normal life in a community, building up their children in confidence. And this broke her, absolutely broke her.
Absolutely. And there's so much pressure, and there's so much fear, and there's so much helplessness that would come up in a situation like this, especially feeling maybe that you can't protect yourself, you can't protect your kids. They had taken in other children who had left the cult. So, I mean, she has 6 biological children that she's now 100% responsible for. She is a target on a hit list by a madman who's dead, and has all of these henchmen that are members of her own family, potentially, that are after her. I mean, the mental torture this person went through, I feel terrible for her.
Yeah. And really, unfortunately, it actually ended up leading to her committing suicide with some of her children
Mm-hmm.
in the house.
Ugh. I mean, it's
And
horrific.
I can't even imagine. Can't even imagine. But as we go through the docu-series, unfortunately, this is not uncommon in this group. Um,
Yeah.
Isaac, who we mentioned in the last episode, who testified against his own dad, Ervil, and basically was the main person who helped put him into prison, also did that 3 years after testifying. And there's a rough number that was mentioned in the docu-series was about 9 members during this period had committed suicide. I read online it was a lot higher, more into double digits, but it doesn't seem like there's an exact number other than it's common.
I think it's just they're compared to the group size, it's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it would be ridiculous to say that the traumas of all of their childhoods and a lot of their adult experiences even contributed to that. And I think that it would be really hard to adjust to regular life, and just to know such evil and to see such terrible things and to not have like a real sense of who you are and how to function. I think that the people who left went through a lot when they left, and it was very scary. And it's not just like I didn't like this church, I don't really like my family. It's more of a, you're in the mafia at birth, and it's very scary to leave.
Yeah.
You basically have no other options.
Yeah. And I think that got even worse, ironically, after Erpel died. So he had that control and power already over the flock. But like we had mentioned, that once he died, the group kind of split into different groups. And one of them was a Taro who led down in Mexico. And he really embraced that criminal side that Ervil kind of started and took those young teenagers and pushed the car theft, money, narcotics, like really dangerous avenue. And again, input that violence where you leave or you try to leave, there's going to be consequences. Up until a point, his own follower actually ended up shooting him in the back for an unknown reason, but I take it probably because he just didn't want to deal with it anymore. He was too much.
Yeah, for sure.
And from there, you have the next one, and again, all orchestrated. The Book of the New Covenant laid out who was supposed to take over. He laid out his succession line, which is kind of funny because you have other groups who followed Dan Jordan, who was like the second in command, and then you have this group who's saying, nope, Daddy said this, Book of New Covenant says this, therefore the next person in line will be William Hebert LeBaron, and that's who will be.
Right. Yeah, that was the general understanding, that that's who was going to take over. And I mean, I guess it's forward thinking to put all these plans in your master Bible before he died under suspicious circumstances in prison.
And he had backups for his backups, which I also think was quite clever.
Yeah, it's like the British royal family.
Oh yeah, he's like, okay, well, I just assume you're gonna piss someone off and they'll off you, so let's do a backup. But between these two, they really took off from a criminal and violence perspective, where they even started trafficking their own women and their sisters. And I think that's kind of where the morality starts to sway, and it's no longer about the religion, but more about the violence and the access that they already had established.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, he didn't stay in power. He moved on because I think the group again realized, okay, we're doing a little too much violence and not enough internal. Like, at the end of the day, this is a religion. And they pushed back a little bit So an individual, Aaron, then stepped up, who truly kind of became the real successor of the LeBaron group. He really embodied Orville and his calculated movements. He was very smart. He understood the scripture of it. And in a group like this, if you understand the scripture and how to manipulate that, you're golden. And
Yeah.
at 18, he stepped in and really brought the whole thing back to where it originated.
I did think it was really interesting how so many people were talking about how he knew the scripture backwards and forwards. I feel like that came up multiple times in the documentary, and it really won him. Like, the crowd was very impressed by that, and I think that he just was a very good preacher, much like Ervil was. I think that they had a lot of very similar qualities, and so it was just like, it felt like the prophet returning.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it was also comfortable, where you had this upbringing of religious foundations, and the violence was because of God and in God's name, not just for the sake of violence. And there was
Right.
that short period that I think the congregation felt it was more of a crime organization and financially motivated than morally and religiously motivated. And they kind of pushed him over. And then that's how Aaron even came in.
That makes sense. It does make sense. He became the one mighty and strong, which was said a million times. Docu-series.
That's so true.
But he was very committed to carrying out the doctrine that was in the Bible that Ervil had written in prison. He was preaching blood atonement, the convenience of just saying that God wants you to kill these people who are inconvenient for you, basically. But he was really able to organize things and was able to follow in Ervil's footsteps in terms of arranging hits.
And the reason we bring this up is because I'm sure most people have started to guess that these 4 o'clock murders were not a coincidence. Someone had to have planned them. And clearly it was not the people of that flock. So it had to have been the splinter group. They just didn't know who it was.
Yeah. And some people thought that Heber was still the leader of that part of the group.
Oh, absolutely.
It wasn't like everybody knew that it was Aaron. So there was a lot of confusion, and
and very smart on their part. They definitely started kind of doing this hand in hand, where Aaron was the brains and Hebert was the bronze, and he really, again, embraced the violent streak within him. And nothing I could find did he ever deny, Hebert specifically, deny being the leader. He just kind of like avoided the questions. So in 1988, him and two others, Richard and Doug, were arrested for auto theft in Phoenix. And remember, this is how they were funding their community. They were stealing cars in the United States, crossing the border, and then would sell them or sell parts or whatever in Mexico. And that's how it was very lucrative for them. That's how they did it. And the three of them actually got caught by the police. Yes, and instantly became that suspect.
Yeah. They're sitting in jail for auto theft when the police get a call from Cynthia LeBaron, who's in Mexico, and she wants to talk. She wants to meet the cops in Texas. And she meets them there. She's given immunity, and she confesses to her role in the 4 o'clock murders. And because she was involved, she knows everybody else that's involved. So she points her fingers squarely at Heber, Richard, and Douglas, and they're already conveniently sitting in prison. So they're pretty easy to find. And then Cynthia also goes to witness protection.
Yeah. Because again, so we had Hebert and Doug, who were adults. They pled guilty to the auto theft charges, serving 10 years. Richard was a minor, doing 3.5. So the idea in the docuseries that kind of got presented was they agreed to it, the lesser charge, hoping that they would just be looked the other way at and people wouldn't keep going.
Mm,
But they were suspects. But again, like we said, you can't prosecute any of them unless you know who did which one. And they all
exactly.
were very coordinated. So if they made a mistake and had Richard killing Mark and it was actually Heber, the whole thing goes up in flames. And without Cynthia, this they would have got away with it. Absolutely would have got away with it.
Totally, because it would be impossible to prove who did what, which is why this is a very smart crime. Actually, it
Mm-hmm.
just there's too many people involved, and when there's so many people involved, which you absolutely need for this type of crime to work, inevitably someone is gonna break away from the group, is gonna rat you out, and is gonna get the best deal for themselves, which is definitely what Cynthia does. Because I think that she was terrified, and I think that she probably wanted to come back to the States, leave the group, and it would have just been impossible for her to do that. But if she gets them put in prison, then she doesn't really have to deal with them, at least anymore, because
Yeah.
they were going to get out.
What do you think Cynthia's motivation was? Because that I can't seem to really pin down. I do think maybe something had happened in her own family that motivated her, much like Isaac, but
Right.
we never got any of that information, and I wish we did.
Yeah, I wonder maybe if it was because of Jennifer getting killed
Oh,
as like
maybe.
kind of a additional, because she didn't bargain for that. Like, she was a lookout, she participated, she helped plan, she is totally has responsibility for this and was actively involved in the planning. And I think that she probably should have gotten some sort of punishment for that, but she did ensure convictions for other even worse people. So I guess it's morally fine, neutral. But I don't know if that she bargained for an innocent child also being killed in this situation. It's kind of different when it's all just adults.
That's a good point because those were people on the list. Those were people who needed blood atonement, and
Right.
an 8-year-old is
Oh,
not on
that's true
that
too.
list.
Right.
So, not what she bargained for, absolutely. And that is the one hard thing about our legal system, where if you're given immunity, it's the idea of you sacrifice one to get the bigger fish. And kind of what we talked about last time, I don't know if Cynthia ever would have been involved in something like this if it wasn't religious manipulation, fear, instilled brainwashing. And I think they probably took that in consideration because, again, she didn't per se pull a trigger. She helped plan, she did surveillance, she organized kind of I don't want to use a gender stereotype, but like the secretary of the group and kind of making everything pretty and perfect and like, all right, now off you go do your task. Like,
Yeah, she kind of like managed the situation, helped put people where they needed to go, kind of like the events coordinator.
yeah, a very
Yeah,
feminine role, but yeah,
right.
needed, very needed. And
Definitely.
she also had one other little tidbit of information because, again, they were focused very much on Heber. And this was the first time they realized he is not the one mighty and strong. He did
Very
not
true.
organize this.
Mm-hmm.
And for 2 years, Aaron has actually been the one in charge, who obviously was on the run, uh, but not even on the radar at the time.
Yeah, that's definitely true because a lot of people still assumed Heber was the one mighty and strong, was the master of the group. So nobody was looking at Aaron really for this. Um, but yeah, Cynthia knows who's in charge and she spills the beans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So eventually, they obviously all go on trial, and it it's so tough because these three at this point all of a sudden kind of change the tune and truly start giving that religious, I believe in my father's teaching. There's a photo of one of them holding a Bible to his head. And yes, you have people in the docuseries, I think it was Anna who mentioned it. As a kid, Heber was a sweet kid, and he just kind of went the other direction as he got older. But time and time again, it has been shown his motivations were never religious. He never truly understood any of the doctrine. He just kind of went along with it. And now he's over here telling his attorneys and the courts that, oh, I'm very religious. This is what my father instilled in me. Like, it's what a flip. I mean, I can't blame him from a like defense perspective, but what a flip.
Definitely.
And unlike a lot of the episodes we've had so far, Cynthia really kind of came in. Yeah, she made some bad decisions and kind of participated, but she testified in there, and these cases were very reliant on her testimony, and she sat in front of those individuals and pointed and explained everything with confidence. She really came in as like a hero compared to a lot of the other women we talk about.
Yeah, I mean, she might be a murderer, but she did also turn around and do some good. And I agree with you that she was brainwashed. And I think that that probably was a big part of her coming forward, was that she was just totally disillusioned with the religion and had come to a place of a new understanding. And I think that that's why I thought that maybe Jennifer was just too much for her, and she realized that none of this made sense. And she was kind of being brave for Jennifer and get her justice. But at least that's what I like to think.
It's a good idea, because there's this concept of, and I'm not Mormon, I've never been Mormon, I just listen to a lot of Mormon stuff. But there's this idea that a lot of ex-Mormons talk about where they have this shelf and something doesn't feel right and they don't like it, but it's fine, and you just put it on the shelf and you don't think about it. And you keep doing that and you keep doing that and you keep doing that until all of a sudden the shelf breaks and then the floodgates open and you kind of realized everything for what it truly is. And I wonder if Jennifer was her final thing on the shelf that kind of just broke it and she realized what she actually was a part of.
I think that's a perfect way to describe it. It's like it's a more beautiful way of saying the straw that broke the camel's back, where it's the final thing. I just cannot take it anymore. Because I wouldn't be surprised if she'd always had doubts and just felt like this was her role and it just was too much. And she came back with a vengeance and wanted revenge probably for all the abuse that she had suffered.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks to her, court case started. They were a jury trial. It took 4 days of deliberation for the jury, and it came back guilty for Hebert. And oh, wait, I mixed them up. Hebert did get guilty. He got a life sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Doug also got guilty, life sentence. And Richard ended up taking a plea agreement and only doing 5 years. And as a reminder, he is also the minor.
What did he plead out to again? What was the charge for that? Was it like manslaughter?
They didn't say
That's
it in
a very
the
good
docu-series, but it's a very good
really
deal.
Good deal.
And
I guess because
wonder,
he's a minor.
Minor definitely had to do with it, but I think he was 17. Like, he wasn't a young minor.
Do you think he gave information too?
That would be my best guess, because that deal is too good to have 2 life sentences, right?
Yeah. The other guy's got forever, and he got 5 years. Which, is he going to do that in a juvenile detention center? Because that would even be easier.
Yeah, right? Ugh.
I wouldn't be surprised if he also gave information, but maybe he didn't testify because that would have been too much for him, and maybe that's why he didn't get immunity, but he did give information that maybe was helpful in the prosecuting of the other people, because Richard didn't have a trial because he pled guilty, so it wouldn't have come up. He wouldn't have had to testify at all.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Let's see if I can do a quick search.
I feel like he'd be the first one I would offer that to as well. If I needed more information, I would probably target the minor and offer them a plea deal, because it's the person with the most to lose, essentially. And
Right.
yeah, because getting life when you're 17 is a very long time.
But
I
it
mean,
does happen, and that's the thing. And there's no way they
yeah,
could have given him immunity at this point just because of the severity of it all. And they didn't
right.
need to. They already had a testimony saying what it was going to be. But I don't know. And it would be interesting, and I wish I had done this, looking up kind of the reputation of those juvenile systems, because it's really dependent on the state. So there are some juvenile systems, this is just my opinion and talking to other professionals in the field, that some states are very, very lenient, and it's more like they say it's focused on rehabilitation, but it's just really a cushy babysitter until they turn 18 and they let them back out. But then there are other states like New York that take juvenile crime very seriously, and they do not, that is jail. That is not vacation. It is not easy. Versus places like in New England tend to be a little bit more supportive in their rehabilitation. So it would be interesting what that state's reputation is. Or, because I guess was it federal charges though? I wonder where he got sentenced. I can't find it anywhere.
I'm not sure. I thought it was in Texas, but I don't know now that because they were in jail in Arizona, I believe. I'm sure everyone wants to listen to us Google this, but it's bothering me now because I don't know where it was.
Yeah. The only other note I do have, which now this kind of ties it all together, is Richard was the one that was actually determined to have killed Dwayne and Jenny. So it was determined that he was the one who did the double murder, yet he got the least amount of time, which is what I thought was so interesting versus the other two who got life sentences but only killed one person. He had to have given something up. He had to
He
have.
must have. He must have.
Ooh,
I mean, I
I
wouldn't.
wonder if it was Aaron. Because I'm going to fast forward a little bit. Soon after, obviously, we mentioned that Aaron was on the run and wanted by the FBI. At this point, he's going through his trial. In 1995, Aaron was then arrested in Mexico, extradited to the United States, which was relatively close to when all of this was kind of wrapping up. I wonder if his deal was, I'll help you get Aaron if I get a lesser sentence.
I think it must have been. I don't think.
Which would never be public, so that's my guess.
Yeah. And I bet if anyone asked Richard how he got it, he would just say that he was a juvenile, because I think that his life would have been in danger if he admitted that he gave up information.
Oh, absolutely.
That's definitely not something you're supposed to do.
Oh, absolutely. And interestingly, Heber, who was found who had killed Mark, wrote letters of accepting his role in Mark's death and sent them to the children, and also accepted responsibility for the role that it played in their mother's suicide. And I thought that was strange for him, because people talked about how basically criminal and homicidal he was. But then I remembered earlier there were talks about how as a kid he was sweet and kind, and it kind of just flipped once he got power. I wonder if after all this and he got charged and sentenced to life, he had this moment of remembering who he truly was, not who the group made him become, and sent those letters out as a hope of, listen, I can't even imagine, but I want you to know that I understand my role, and I apologize and I ask your forgiveness for what is to come, basically.
I think that it was genuine. I just was looking at his Wikipedia earlier today, Heber LeBaron, and it said that he had converted to a different type of Christianity after he got convicted, and that he's like deeply ashamed of all the actions that he did. And I think that for me anyway, it's easy to look at these fundamentalist groups, especially this violent, crazy one, and look at the women as victims and the men as perpetrators. But I think that Heber was also brainwashed and
Oh,
also under the
100%.
control of the group and had been indoctrinated since birth. It's very, very difficult to resist that while you're in it.
Right. It doesn't matter gender at that point. Brainwashing is brainwashing. And
Yeah.
do I think some of them did really terrible things? Yes.
Yeah.
Do I
And
think
Heber did terrible things.
Right. But do I think the majority of the people that we're talking about would have done it without that brainwashing and generational like conditioning? I don't think they would.
Mm-hmm.
Heber, I think,
Yeah.
would have probably been an okay person. Aaron, on the other hand, I think he's just a bad person because he's just a carbon copy of Earl.
Yeah. Very
So,
narcissistic,
those
very
two.
self-centered. I mean, that's someone with no remorse,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Oh, my favorite, the video of when he got arrested and extradited. He looks them dead in the eye and goes, no, 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 I'm not involved in a cult. I'm a director of an English school.
Oh my God.
The,
So creepy. He's
the
literally
confidence.
he says it like, what? I'm just like a normal dorky guy. I would never do anything.
Oh, it's so funny. Like, it's not funny, but it's so funny.
It's kind of funny because he still got arrested. It's not like they believed him.
Oh, yeah. Arrested, tried, convicted of masterminding multiple murders. Because not only was
Right.
the 4 o'clock murders, he also orchestrated a long con of Dan Jordan, who was the leader of another split off and on the list. So he had his own little stack of murder mysteries, and then sentenced to 45 years in jail.
Yeah.
Prison, not jail. Prison.
Yeah. Big
Sorry.
distinction, for sure.
There is.
No. It's
There
okay.
is.
It would be a very long 45 years being in a county jail. That would be a very long time to be there.
And so, grand total between kind of it all, we have 33-ish murders. Because
Yeah.
there is no formal count. There's definitely probably some out there that happen that we don't know about. And again, communication between government agencies and all that. So I would argue that it's probably a lot higher than that. But 33 is the number that the docuseries kind of settled on.
So let's say it's 33. And then there's also somewhere between like 9 and 15 suicides.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are multiple members of the group that are serving life sentences in prison. I mean, the amount of unnecessary lives wasted in this situation is just almost unthinkable.
Yeah. And you know that number is probably a lot higher because it's probably not including the quote mystery deaths or the mystery disappearances, because under all of their reigns, there were people that would just up and disappear, never to be seen or heard from again. I'm guessing they're probably not alive, but
this is
Mexico
probably
has
more
a lot
like
of desert. A lot of desert.
Yeah. It's either people who are running away and actually managed to get away, or people that were executed or forced to go into hiding. I mean, there's no good situation that would happen, that they'd be just out of sight forever.
Right. Absolutely. And what is crazy is there's still this luring fear of this group. Even though the original founder is dead, the second coming is in prison, it appears the group has kind of disassembled and gone into the shadows, but the book was never completed. The list was never done. And there are still people that have his beliefs, and at any time they could pick it back up. And if it's not necessarily like, hey, I don't know, Jonathan was on this list, but Jonathan died of natural causes, but he has a son named Andy. Let's do Andy in replacement to blood atone their family, to get rid of the sins for the family so the rest of them can be saved. It's always a possibility.
Yeah. I mean, it's perfect logic, flawless. But they definitely would do that. They would just make substitutions because it's whatever's convenient. It's an excuse to murder people is what they're doing with the blood atonement. And if any of his unhinged followers reemerge, I mean, it would be terrible and terrifying. I'm hopeful that enough years have passed that there are less and less people that would want to pick up where he left off. It seems like there are just people that still live in that like community that he had lived in. But yeah, it's
sad. It really is. But part of me really wants to read this book too. Like, the other part of me thinks it would be really interesting to see if I can read between the lines to find who is on this list of blood atoning, or is it just blatantly like a chapter in the book that says blood atonement number 1, Dan, number 2, Mark. Like, I'd be very curious what it looks like.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's names though. I think it's descriptions. Because
or
I
like
think
nicknames.
I feel like it might be. I feel like it's all written in riddles.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like trying to read a Bible, which is so difficult to do, honestly, because it's kind of written confusingly. It doesn't read like a story. And I feel like his was probably like way worse than any Bible that I've seen, because he was a crazy person in prison. And it's not like this was being published and like this is just like his ramblings that are being smuggled out on different pieces of paper. So
right. And it was copied by members. So there's only about 20 copies in existence, is their best guess. Because I looked. Like, I was so
little
curious.
Light summer read.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but yeah.
You're just gonna skip to the hit list.
Right? It's not on public consumption. You can't just go buy it at Barnes and Noble. It was hand copied and written over and over again by wives, and that's how the few copies in existence did emerge, is because that's how they distributed it. And supposedly there's 15 names of people on this hit list, and I noticed through some article that I read that not all of it was actually church members. He also was expanding it to anyone who really disgruntled him at any point. So there's definitely normal civilians outside the group, probably like presidents. He claimed to be the president, the true president of the United States. He's probably on there just because he stole his true title. I don't know. But it'd be interesting to see who he determined to be disloyal.
I would like to read it, but I just feel like it's also, there's so many mistakes in it now because of all the copying that was done by multiple different people. There's always going to be mistakes. There's always going to be things that are like not written exactly correctly. And it's just, I feel like it's going to be a lot of gibberish, but I would I would definitely look at it. I'd be interested to see how it's structured. Like, is it structured like a book or is it just a diary?
Mm. Do we have chapters? Is there
Yeah.
categories?
I want a table of contents. I want a list of chapters. And I'm going to skip right to hit list.
Oh, the dream. Mr. Mormon Manson, please come from above and tell us your final command.
Yeah. I wonder how long it would have gotten if he had not, like, he'd probably still be writing it if he was still alive.
That's true. He probably, because I stand by what I said. I don't think it was suicide.
I
And
don't
I
think so.
stand by he probably would have been over here having more conjugal visits and shooting off orders to people and orchestrating these things. Between him and Aaron combined, I don't think Aaron ever would have got caught if he was still alive.
Probably not.
Because there would have been
Well,
more fear. And I don't think Cynthia would have ran away because it would have been so controlled that she never would have been able to get away with it.
yeah. But also, if Errol was still alive, even in prison, he would have still been in charge, I think, of this sect. And so, like, Aaron may have been like a leader in the community, but he wouldn't have been the one mighty and strong because that would have still been
Mm.
Errol. So, because I don't think that you just stop being the prophet when you're in prison,
Right. No, you
clearly,
don't.
because that's where he wrote the Bible.
Right. That's a good point. And then none of the three subsets would have happened. Darren Jordan
Mhm.
probably would still be alive and doing terrible things because he wasn't a threat. He would have been probably put in charge of something and just kept moving along.
It definitely changed the whole dynamic for the group when Herbal died because he was the prophet for a while and he had been very, very strict and controlling and evil. So I'm sure it caused some chaos when he
Mm-hmm.
died because everyone was expecting him to get out of it just like he had done before. Probably came as a huge blow to the community.
Yeah. Oh, probably. Well, that was pretty much the gist of it. What do you think of the documentary overall?
It was okay. I feel like I should have been more enthralled by all the murders. I just didn't find the people speaking to be very compelling, but their stories were interesting. It was just like the people themselves were just they didn't have the charisma I was looking for, I guess. But I don't know if that's like an unfair critique of this. It was informative. What about you?
Yeah, I know what you mean about the certain characters in it. And the son, what was his name? Um, because there was one of the men in the series that I really actually enjoyed when he talked. And he was the one that opened the door for the raid to come in. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I can
Uh,
see him, but I cannot think of his name.
yeah, tall, brown hair, ended up joining the military.
Yeah,
I enjoyed him. I thought he
I did
did
like
a
him.
nice presentation where he was very much a little bit of emotion paired with the reality of it. I don't think he tried to make excuses for how he thought. He was just like, listen, this is what it was.
Yeah,
Here
maybe
we
that's
are.
what my hesitation is. It still came off as very like keep sweet fake for a lot of them, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that I've noticed that and I love LDS content, not I guess FLDS content. I love a cult, I love polygamy stuff. I love a
Mm-hmm.
polygamy TV show, but I feel like I either like it as reality TV or I like a memoir by the
Mm.
FLDS where I can read it or I can listen to it as an audiobook where I'm not actually listening to the people from the group, which is it makes me feel kind of bad, but I just feel like they are not authentic with how they're talking. So
I
it
think
comes across as insincere.
I get what you're saying because I think they came across very defensive and tried to justify a lot of things, which I understand from an outside person who has not experienced even a quarter of the violence and trauma that they have, I would probably be a little defensive too. But I also think if you're gonna do a documentary series like this, you kind of just have to stop trying to justify what, like, it is what it is, and it's okay. And because there is so little information about this specific subset, they might feel that they're the voice, and it puts them in a really difficult position of trying to balance, I don't want everybody to hate me, but also like I'm embarrassed of my part as well. But I was born into it. And what was I gonna do? Like,
it's a conflict. It really is, because you not only were you part of this cult, but like your entire family is this cult, and it's associated with so many bad things, and you're out of it now, but it still was your whole childhood and past. And it would be hard to I agree with you about the guy that's a Marine, which I cannot think of his name either.
Igor.
I have it. Igor. He had the most realistic take on everything, I felt like. And it was much easier to listen to him talk. But I think that there's a level to just surviving every day that they have to mentally wrap their heads around what happened and justify their father's actions, their mother's actions, Lillian's actions, all of these people, because these are all relatives and people who they care about a lot that have done these terrible things or have been super harmed in the process. So I think they just need to justify it for their own sakes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's understandable. But I just didn't find them to be television stars. And I don't think that's going to be a thing for them. But I'll be interested in reading their memoirs if they want to write them.
There we go. Meet in the middle. All right. Well, that was the LeBaron group, which I think I knew it was dark, but there's definitely things in there that did surprise me as well. Mm-hmm. And gives a lot of context for some of the other groups that we have already talked about or going to talk about more, and where some of them kind of came from versus where the lines got drawn for each subset, which is interesting.
Definitely. I loved this like mini FLDS group.
Yeah.
Interesting dynamics.
I wonder how many times their paths got crossed. Because they definitely wore like normal clothes too. So that's another difference where they decided the blood atonement thing was what really they were going to stick with, but they modernized with clothing as time went, versus FLDS definitely stayed with that strict traditional prairie dress kind of look. Then
that is true. They were, I mean, I guess they were modestly dressed in the older pictures, but they weren't all wearing matching dresses.
But in time, in style.
Yeah.
And it's peculiar how each group has their own thing. So you have like the FLDS had that prairie dress, the LeBarons, the blood atonement, the Kingstons had the pure blood. Like, it's interesting how each of them have their own little thing they latch onto.
We're definitely gonna have to talk about the Kingstons.
So many opinions. Mm-hmm. Amanda Ray, who is I'm obsessed with her, escaped the Kingstons, so I can't wait to talk about them.
I would love to. I think that would be great.
All right. Well, any last thoughts on the LeBaron group and anyone we've talked about?
I don't think so. How about you?
Nope, I'm good. I'm kind of glad they're all done for now.
Alrighty. Have a good one. Talk soon.